Okay, thank you, Chloe. So my name's Vicky Morgan. I'm a learning and development advisor at North Northamptonshire County Council, and I am working in with the adult social care training. So I've been invited here today to do a quick sort of 2 hour whistle stop tour on safeguarding adults and giving you all a basic awareness. So, what we're hoping to cover in our 2 hours this morning is hopefully to give you an awareness of the legislation and policy that surrounds safeguarding adults and understand the definitions of abuse, types of abuse, and how to recognise these, and an understanding of how to report and record suspected abuse. Okay, so we've had safeguarding adults in legislation now since the Care Act 2014, which was enacted in 2015. So that set out the clear legal framework for how local authorities and other parts of the system should protect adults at risk from abuse or neglect. So local authorities were given safeguarding duties under that act. So they must lead a multi-agency local safeguarding system that seeks to prevent abuse and neglect and stop it quickly when it happens. So that's where our Safeguarding Adults Board is part of that. We need to make inquiries or request others to make them when they think an adult with care and support needs may be at risk of abuse or neglect, and they need to find out what action may be needed. They need to establish Safeguarding Adults Board, including the local authority, NHS and police, which will develop, share and implement a joint safeguarding strategy. They're also responsible for carrying out safeguarding adults reviews. So when someone with care and support needs dies as a result of neglect or abuse, and there is a concern that the local authority or its partners could have done more to protect them, a safeguarding adult review would be carried out. So this isn't a chance to point fingers, this is a chance to look at the systems and see how the systems could be improved to stop things happening, to stop the same situation happening again. Okay. These are also published on the Safeguarding Adults Board website. And they also need to arrange for independent advocates to represent and support a person who is subject of a safeguarding adults inquiry or review if required. So if a person doesn't have someone suitable to support them and they don't have and they need that extra person to speak up for them, we're responsible for making sure that that's done. Okay. And any relevant person or organisation must provide information to a Safeguarding Adults Board as required. Okay, so we've had safeguarding for quite a while now, but I just want you to use the chat box quickly and give me some ideas. What does safeguarding mean to you? So we've been talking about it for a while, but what does it actually mean? So if you can type some ideas in the chat, and because it's being recorded, I will read some of these out because these won't show up on the recording. Okay, so give me some ideas. What is it? We're talking about safeguarding. What does it mean to you? So we've got protecting the vulnerable, oh, looking out for vulnerable adults, protecting vulnerable people, empowering the vulnerable, being vigilant. It's quite interesting. We've got quite a lot of vulnerable on there, and that was one thing that the Care Act no longer talks about is vulnerable adults. So instead, it talks about adults with care and support needs because sometimes people don't always identify as being vulnerable. So action to promote welfare and protect from harm, not looking the other way, preventing risks. Okay, quite a few ideas on there. Highlighting abuse. Okay. So quite a few good ideas on there. As I say, vulnerable adult has been replaced by adult with care and support needs. Yep, sharing information appropriately, that's definitely part of safeguarding. Okay, so we'll have a look and see what safeguarding actually means. So when we're talking about safeguarding, the Care Act statutory guidance is defining safeguarding as protecting an adult's right to live in safety, free from abuse and neglect. It is about people and organisations working together to prevent and stop both the risks and experience of abuse or neglect, while at the same time making sure that the adult's well-being is promoted, including where appropriate having regard to their views, wishes, feelings, and belief in deciding on any action. Okay, this must recognize that adults sometimes have complex interpersonal relationships and may be ambivalent, unclear, or unrealistic about their personal circumstances. Okay, so obviously we had a lot of protecting on that list, and that is definitely part of safeguarding, but we can't absolutely promise to protect people, but we can try and protect their right to live in safety, free from abuse and neglect. Okay. And obviously, we do all need to work together. So that's why we've got lots of people here today from lots of different organisations. Okay. So that's the looking at together. And that's the, because lots of people are seen by maybe multiple people, or maybe they're only interacting with one or two agencies. Okay, so there's lots of people with eyes out there who can help to spot possible abuse or neglect. Okay, and under the Care Act looks a lot at well-being, so we need to make sure that whatever we're doing, we're promoting the adult's well-being. Okay, so we need to make sure that we're thinking about what the adult wants, because well-being is very unique to all of us. So we all have different ideas, different things that we need for our own well-being. Yeah, some of you will be into healthy eating, going to the gym. Some people will enjoy a glass of wine, whatever it is that people need for their well-being. Okay. So we need to make sure we understand that about the person so we can make sure it's their well-being that we're looking after. Okay. So does that fit in with what you would, hopefully that fits in with your thoughts about adult safeguarding? So linked into that, we've also got our duty of care. So as eyes and ears, we're out and about. So it's our legal or moral responsibility to protect the safety and well-being of others. So this includes taking adequate and reasonable steps so that individuals or their property are protected from harm. Okay. And it is your responsibility, it is the responsibility of people who work in health and social care to work in a way that will help to prevent abuse. So one of the ways that we need to make sure we do that is making sure that everyone knows what to look for. Yeah. So people can know, um, are aware and able to look at and know what to do when they've got concerns, who to talk to. That's why it's important to make sure everyone's got some safeguarding adults training, okay? Because that will help us to protect the safety and well-being of others. Okay, so what is abuse? So the Care Act doesn't give a definition of abuse and neglect, because it can take many forms and it'll be different for different people. So as we said, everyone's got their own ideas of well-being, their own ideas of what they want. So instead of giving a definition of abuse, it categorized types of behavior that could indicate an adult is at risk of abuse or neglect. Okay, so I don't know if people are aware of the different categories. So we've got 10 types of abuse or neglect under the Care Act. So if people want to have a go in the chat box and see if we can get all 10 types. So sexual abuse, financial abuse, physical and emotional abuse, neglect, physical abuse. We've got Cookering come through, which covers quite a few different types of abuse. So it's not a category on its own, but it is something we are concerned about. We've got modern slavery. Someone's put coercive control, so that comes under a type of abuse as well. We've got discriminatory abuse, institutional abuse or organisational abuse as it's now known. So it was institutional, but now we've got less institutions and more large organisations. They've changed the name of it. Neglect and acts of omission. We've got racial there, so that would come under discriminatory abuse. We've got self-harming come through. That's not a type of abuse on its own, but there is one that's similar to that. That's it, self-neglect we've got from somebody. Yep, that's the type of abuse. Again, radicalisation comes under quite a few different types of abuse. It doesn't stand on its own. And domestic abuse, I think that's the one that we were missing. So I think I've seen all 10 come through now. So let's have a look on the next slide. So hopefully I saw all of these come through. So physical, sexual, psychological or emotional, financial, neglect and acts of omission, discriminatory abuse, domestic abuse, modern slavery, organisational and self-neglect. Okay. So hopefully you've all got some ideas about what you might see for those type of things. So what we're going to do is we're going to put you into breakout rooms. Okay. So you've got about 5 minutes, maybe a little bit longer, to discuss the type of abuse. So each room has got a title of the type of abuse. Okay. So you'll automatically be assigned to a room with that title. Okay, so make a note of which room you're in so you know which type of abuse you're discussing. Okay, and what I want you to do is think about what does that abuse look like and what might we see for that type of abuse. Okay, so what do we mean by that type of abuse? Okay, and then if you can decide who's going to give some feedback to the group, that would be great. Okay. Okay, Chloe, are you okay to open the rooms now?
Yeah, sorry, it's not letting me assign people automatically, so I'm just going to have to do it really quickly manually. Is that all right?
Yeah, no worries. Okay, so Chloe's going to open the rooms up. So, yeah. So, what is that type of abuse? What do we mean by it, and what could we see that might be concerning, particularly linked to that type of abuse? And then we're going to get feedback from each of the rooms afterwards. So, if you've got one person in each room that's prepared to share, yeah. If no one's prepared to share, if no one's prepared to speak, we can use the chat function as well. So the room I was in was physical abuse. Okay, and I didn't give the answers away. I did let people talk. So the general gist of what we were saying was that it was around things that you can physically see, and although it crosses over into some of the other types of abuse, so you might see it in domestic abuse, not always, but depending on the relationship of the people, it might be classed as domestic abuse, even though what you're seeing is physical. Okay. And also sexual abuse can sometimes have physical bruising there, but obviously it depends on what happened. Okay, what type of abuse it is. Yeah. And we talked about how, people might have all sorts of other things going on, so they're quite often it's not just one type of abuse. It's quite often there can be more than one type going on for people. Okay, so did anyone know that they were in a room where they were talking about sexual abuse? Does anyone want to share either by unmuting themselves or by typing what they had? Any volunteers? Anyone want to add into the chat any discussion they had about that type of abuse?
Hi, Vicky. sexual abuse came into the modern slavery debate as well, because obviously some people are put into sex work against their wishes. So there was a little bit of discussion around that.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, absolutely. So there's crossover there, isn't there? Some people are employed in modern slavery as sex slaves. Yeah. We've got a comment that they spoke about how sensitive this type of abuse is. Yeah, absolutely. Does anyone know? Does anyone talk about any of the things you might see related to sexual abuse? So some of the things you might see. Oh, yeah, we've got another crossover with domestic abuse. Absolutely. Yeah. So someone's written withdrawal. So obviously, I think that from that they mean the person becoming withdrawn. Okay. We've also got things like unexplained pregnancy, unexplained bruising to those areas. Sexual abuse doesn't just cover, unexplained STIs in there as well. And we've got position of trust issues. It also covers things like voyeurism, so being forced to watch sexual acts. It covers inappropriate touching. It covers looking at being asked to look at pornography against your will. So it's all of those kind of things come under sexual abuse. So it isn't just about rape, etc. Okay, so it does go further than that. There doesn't necessarily have to have been rape for that to have occurred. Okay. So what did anyone know that they had psychological or emotional abuse as their group?
Good morning.
Yeah, morning.
In our group chat, we spoke about things like manipulation, isolation, that people obviously there's gaslighting now is a big thing. You have coercive control, and emotional abuse. It could be, playing on someone's vulnerability or coming through a traumatic experience, and using that to emotionally control them. There was discussion about monitoring of calls, and now obviously we live in a world that's very much online, so there can be monitoring and control around that as well, which can obviously have a detrimental effect.
Absolutely, yeah. So with physical and with psychological and emotional abuse, there's not the physical contact there, is there? It's kind of done with behaviour and words, and
much more difficult to prove, isn't it? It's
absolutely, because there's nothing you can there's often not something you can concretely see, so it's all down to what the person shares with you about what's going on, isn't it?
Absolutely.
Potentially the threat of physical violence, so that kind of idea that they're using threats, but then they don't always have to carry them out. So all of that comes into psychological and emotional abuse, and all of those things that Jenna's group identified around coercive control and the use of covert surveillance. So things like, all of us can be tracked quite easily through our mobile phones if people want to, can't they? So in theory, you could have very little privacy. But lots of times the perpetrator can switch up when other people are around and come across as the nicest people. Yeah, absolutely. So they might well change their behaviour in public to how they behave behind closed doors. So again, that can be quite difficult to pinpoint what's going on and who's telling the truth. So if someone's trying to get help because they're in that situation, sometimes it can be quite unbelievable because the person can come across as, really nice and caring the rest of the time. When they're out in public. So it could be one that's going on behind closed doors. Again, some of the things we might see in the person is likely to be withdrawn, aren't they? They're likely to be, if it's something new, if you knew them before and you notice a change in them, Yeah, could it be something like this that's going on for them? Yeah, something that people can't see. Okay, does any group know that they definitely had financial abuse?
Yeah, we had financial abuse in our group, and discussed, really it can be identified by professionals in a number of ways. So fraud or internet scams that can be reported into police. So where we've got banking, people purporting to be from a bank, particularly for a number of elderly people, and then taking card details and withdrawing money. Internet scams around relationships, people believing they're in a relationship with somebody, sending money because, you know, they're in distress or need to get from another country. And then specifically around the pressurizing of an adult, and that can happen in a domestic abuse scenario, but it can also happen within families where perhaps there's money involving or wills involving money at stake. And in our group there was a GP surgery saying the number of you know, clients or patients they have where family members would perhaps be going along as well and trying to advocate for them, saying they no longer were able to make decisions of their own volition, and how it becomes more difficult when those people move into care homes for professionals to try and manage that, you know, financial abuse against people. And also modern day slavery, financial abuse within, you know, modern day slavery where finances are very tightly controlled.
Absolutely. So it can be things like, also if you walk into a property and people haven't got food, etc., you know, again, you know, is it because they haven't got the money to buy it, or is it due to neglect and somebody not buying it for them? Yeah, things, as you say, things like not having access to their finances, for whatever reason, or not being given what they want. You know, if you go into someone's house in winter and it's freezing cold, you know, why haven't they got their heating on? Is it because someone's not been paying the bills? Or again, sometimes it takes those questions to unpick why those things are there. Or, you know, if you've been in before and all of a sudden things are missing. So, you know, expensive items are missing from the home, you know, does the person have an explanation about why they're no longer there, you know, why they don't have a TV anymore? Yeah, so it's asking those questions to try and unpick and spotting those differences, as well as everything that the group identified. Okay. And again, yeah, sometimes it can be due to people not realizing what they're entitled to and not getting their benefits. But sometimes all those things can be because someone's siphoning off their money or not giving them what they're entitled to. Okay, so did any group know that they had neglect and acts of omission? Taking it from the silence that there wasn't a group that had it. So does anyone want to put any bits in the chat, or does anyone want to speak about what their group talked about that covered neglect?
Yes, we covered self-neglect, which is the last one. So we defined it as failure for someone to look after themselves in terms of meeting basic human needs such as eating, drinking, personal hygiene and cleanliness, and looking after their health. And we said this can come in the form when someone presents themselves as being unkempt, dirty, maybe they got head lice or bad smell, especially when they come into hospital, or they might be malnourished or even obese because they're just eating anything. And some may come with pressure sores, yet they are actually able to mobilize and look after themselves, but they may present with pressure sores and moisture lesions. And or their medical condition can be worsening due to non-compliance with medication. Maybe they don't go for repeat prescriptions, or they're just not taking their medication. And then we go back to hypothermia again. Maybe they come in with hypothermia, and probably they're not putting heating on during the winter, which goes back again to financial abuse, where maybe bills are not being paid. But then the issue is, why are they not being paid? Who's not paying the bills? Do they have the money and they're just not paying, or they're just not turning the heating on? So those are the things we looked at on self-neglect. Yeah,
absolutely.
thank you.
So the things are similar with neglect. It's just the difference is that somebody's potentially doing it to the person or not doing it to the person with neglect, whereas self-neglect, the person's in control and doing it themselves. Okay, so a lot of the signs would be the same. Okay, so, and you had some good ones in there around the kind of not eating or the eating the wrong things. So people are putting on lots of weight and they've got issues of obesity. Okay. We also had in the chat basic care needs not being met and not caring for your adults with additional needs, so providing food, shelter, clothing, etc. Yeah, so as you say, unkempt, not wearing the right clothing for the right time of year. Yeah. Okay. And someone said they've got a poor connection, so I think the recording is due to be going on the Northamptonshire Safeguarding Adults Board website, so you will be able to watch it on there. Okay. So did anyone know they had discriminatory abuse as a category? Anyone got any ideas on what discriminatory abuse covers? So anyone wants to put it in the chat or unmute themselves and talk? Also, we've got a question there. Is this hate crime? Yeah. So we've got unfair treatment due to race, gender or religion. Yeah. Absolutely. So it is that being treated differently because of a characteristic about you or that poor treatment. Yeah. Yep. So hate crime could well come into this. Yeah. Being treated differently by your peers. So disability on there. Yeah. Age. So it could be age, disability. Yeah. Yeah. Honour-based violence could come into discriminatory abuse. It sometimes crosses over into domestic abuse as well, depending on the relationships of the people involved. So quite often honour-based violence can come under both, but yeah, that would be, could be discriminatory abuse. Okay. Yeah. So unequal distribution of resources to enable management of activities of daily living. Harm motivated by prejudice. Yeah. So the thing with discriminatory abuse is the fact that people, you know, they're suffering some harm due to their differences. Yeah. So it's motivated by people treating you differently because of your differences. Okay. Again, it can cover a lot of, yeah, it can be institutionalized. It does cross over with quite a lot of other types of abuse. Okay, so depending on the situation, it could cross over with some of the other types as well. Okay, so there could be some physical abuse in there, but it might be it's happening because someone's treating you differently because of one of the characteristics about you. Okay, so then we've got domestic abuse. So did anyone know that they definitely had domestic abuse in their group?
Yes, we had domestic abuse.
Yeah.
And we determined that it's really an umbrella term that incorporates most of the other abuses.
Yeah.
Often it's physical violence, but can include the others such as rape, etc. We're most used to hearing domestic abuse being male on female abuse. However, it can be female on male, child on parent, child on child, or parent on child.
Yeah.
Most popularly, we hear of women being abused, but often men don't report abuse for fear of stigma. Women can be more susceptible when they're pregnant because they're protecting the unborn child, or often they're protecting their children from an abuser, so they are most at risk. It increased over the pandemic. It was reported to increase over the pandemic due to isolation and agencies not being able to get involved as much. Domestic abuse can quite often be fatal. And often it's not reported because of the shame. There can be shock and disbelief involved in that. And quite often people are trying to save relationships. So there's the emotional aspect of the abuse, which prevents it from being reported, and therefore it's perpetual. Yeah.
Absolutely. And the person who's in doing the abuse can quite often change and become nice, can't they, as well at times?
Yes, absolutely. In front of everybody, they can come across as sweet as sugar, but in reality, that person, when the doors are closed, are living a different life.
Absolutely. So that's why it can be quite difficult for people to report, can't it? As well. Yeah, but yeah, you got some really good points in your group there. We've had another word come up in the chat, so coercion. So obviously coercive control is now an offence, which quite often covers domestic abuse. So that kind of coercion. Okay, thank you for that. It was a very thorough chat your group had. Okay, does anyone know that they definitely had modern slavery in their group?
We had modern slavery.
Yeah.
And we talked a bit about its relationship to human trafficking, and people being brought unknowingly into thinking they're coming into the country, you know, to a job, and they get here, their passports taken off them, they're often locked up, and then they're only taken out in order to work in whatever industry the traffickers have ready for them. So it could be sexual slavery, it could be working in all kinds of different businesses in the country, and often the business that employs them doesn't know that they're slaves, because they think they're coming from, for example, an employment agency, and they pay the employment agency. That money never gets to the people who are being enslaved. There's quite a few different businesses that are kind of known. Oh, sorry, I'm getting strange feedback. So, for example, the clothing industry is one that people are often put into, and then sometimes like nail bars and you know, these car washes and all sorts. So there's quite a few industries that people are aware of and can maybe look out for, but often you just don't know that these, you know, what's happening. I guess if you're working with somebody and they get picked up from work and taken straight away, you never hear of them until the next day they're back at work again, and they have no friendships and they don't go out, you don't see them outside of work, and you might start to think something's going wrong there.
Absolutely. And they might not, you know, they don't have access to their documents, they might have some of the signs of neglect, so the unkemptness, etc. They might well not speak the language or be scared to share or talk about what's going on in their life for fear of reprisals. Quite often people can be threatening about what's going on, you know, possibly back home in their own country. They might well be threatening family back there if the person doesn't join in. They might so there's lots of things to look out for, and you mentioned quite a few of the industries. There's also agriculture and kind of some of the gangs as well. Things like people that are going around doing tarmacking your drive type things. There's quite a few people that have been found in those kinds of groups as well. So people tend to be living in quite poor conditions. Yeah, so forced labour. Yeah, so they're not being, they're not being paid or paid adequately for what they do. So they might only get a very small amount. Yeah, and they might be getting large amounts deducted off them for equipment, for accommodation, even though they might be sleeping 10 people in mattresses in the same room. You know, they might be getting charged quite a lot for that accommodation. So all of those things can make us concerned that actually it's modern slavery that's going on. And we have had quite a few cases in Northamptonshire that have come to light around this. I think we might have had restaurants as well in Northamptonshire where people were found working in the kitchens as slaves. And so again, it is still going on. Yeah.
I was just going to say another thing is that it's a little bit of a misconception that anybody who's a modern slave will have been trafficked into the country from outside. Actually, there's more trafficking happens within the country itself. And so you might not be looking at foreign workers at all. I mean, that as you say, you may very well be, but you might be looking at domestic workers who are being trafficked, and that might be even harder to spot. I don't know.
Yeah, absolutely. Now, we've also got quite a lot of people with learning disabilities in the past that have been trafficked as well, and people with mental health issues. Again, they're all the kind of groups that can get caught up in this without really, you know, if they're caught at a bad time, you know, they can easily get caught up in modern slavery. And once you're in it, it's very difficult to get out of because they've taken everything from you. Okay, so yeah, coercion into debt. So quite often people, they might have the debt of accommodation. They might have the debt of their, if they are from another country, the debt of that travel over. Yeah, I think somewhere there's a table about the percentage of people who are, where people are from that are caught in modern slavery. And actually, there's an awful lot of British people that are in Britain in modern slavery. I think it's the Hope for Justice website have got a lot of further resources on modern slavery if anyone wants to go and look at anything else on there. Okay, did anyone know that they had organisational abuse in their group?
Yeah, we had organisational abuse.
Yeah.
And what we said was it was about mistreatment in the workplace, or they lack capacity to make their own decisions. So they lack the things you'd look out for is lack of privacy, lack of dignity, lack of respect, lack of choice. They'd be quite confused, quite introverted as well. It's a bit form of bullying, isn't it?
Absolutely, yeah. It tends to happen it tends to be where sort of care services are happening for the good of the organisation rather than being person-centred. They tend to be very centred around the needs of an organisation. Yeah. So things like very restrictive, overly restrictive meal times, meal choices, the times that care staff come to you, things like ringing up and saying, would this, ringing someone up who they know is confused and saying, we haven't got any care staff to put you to bed tonight. Would it be all right if we come at 4 and put you to bed? Things like that. So it's working for the organisation. So we've got a comment, would this apply to volunteers as well as employees? It applies to, remember, we're looking at safeguarding adults. We're looking at adults with care and support needs. Okay, so this applies to people with care and support needs who are receiving care and support that is not person-centred. Okay, so it tends to be more organisational. So poor professional policy and practice resulting in neglect and incidents of harm we've got there. Okay, so we're looking at those. Yeah, so we've got poor inadequate care which results in harm, lack of choice, staff not trained appropriately, poor moving and handling techniques. That can also come under physical as well, but yeah, if it's if they're not trained properly, then it could be organisational, staff not following policies and procedures, and poor practice. So quite often this is where incidents like Winterbourne View came in. So that kind of being entrenched throughout the organisation. Okay, so we've got someone saying places like Amazon making workers work to unrealistic targets and lack of welfare. So that doesn't actually, because unless the people have got care and support needs, then it's not a type of abuse and neglect. It doesn't make it right, but it does, unless the person's got care and support needs, we're not looking at that sort of organisation. Yeah, we're looking at organisations that are providing care. So it's abuse in those sort of situations. Okay, so if the people they're employing have got care and support needs under the Care Act, then we might well be looking at that. Yeah, so someone suggested that that's institutionalized bullying. Okay, so again, yeah, unnecessary restraint of you've got vulnerable adults there, so that's adults with care and support needs. Yeah, so when they don't need to be restrained, but restraints being used with people. Yeah, so all of those kind of poor practices that go on in organisations as a result of poor management and poor training. Okay, it could be that staff, when they're inducted, they're taught all these ways of working. Yeah, so things like, you know, people come in from the day centre, they're queued up at the shower, they're all stripped off and put in the shower one by one. They come out, they're quickly dried, they're put in their pyjamas, and it's 4 o'clock in the afternoon. Those kind of policies. Yeah, failure to whistle blow those serious concerns as well. So other staff not feeling confident to be able to speak up because they don't feel that they are supported, or they'll be believed, because there can also be organisations that have got quite closed doors as well, so they don't let people in easily. Okay, so lots of people don't have access to it. Okay, so hopefully that's given you an idea of the 10 types of abuse and neglect. Okay, so we talked about self-neglect, that group popped up earlier, so we talked about those, and we've also got just come into the chat, denying an adult at risk access to professional support. So again, that could be if it's not part of the organisation, if they're not supporting the person to do it. Okay, so hopefully that's given you a good idea about all the different types of abuse that are out there and some of the things that we might be looking for. Okay, so I think we've probably done this. So as we've gone through, we've talked about the different types of abuse and what we might think could be happening. Okay, so we've also got to think about that, spotting the signs of abuse. So neglect can happen, abuse and neglect can happen anywhere. So it could be in your own home. It could be in a public place while you're in hospital or attending a day centre or in a college or care home. The person could be living alone, or they could be living with others. The person causing the harm may be a stranger, but more often than not, you'll know they're usually someone that's known to the person and the person feels safe with them. They're quite often in a position of trust and power, such as a health and care professional. Okay, so the research shows that actually it's not very often strangers that are committing the abuse. The only one where this tends to come up is in the case of scams. Majority of the time, it will be someone that knows the person, who's built up the trust, that carries out the abuse. Okay. So we've talked about quite a few of these signs, but generally for quite a lot of the different types of abuse, if we've known the person for a while, it could be a change in the person that makes us think that something's going on. Okay. Or it could be that someone presents in these ways and we might need to kind of look carefully to find out if it's just the way they are, or actually are they subjected to abuse and neglect. So are they quiet and withdrawn? Are they aggressive or angry for no obvious reasons? Are they looking unkempt, dirty, or thinner than usual? It could be sudden changes in their character, such as appearing helpless, depressed, or tearful. So again, it might need some unpicking, you know, what's making them feel like that? Is it something that's happening? Is it something abusive that's happening to them? It could be the same injuries happening more than once. Yeah. We've talked about some of those physical signs, so those bruises, wounds, fractures, or other untreated injuries. And again, we've talked about how those could be a sign of several types of abuse. So on there you could physical, modern slavery, sexual abuse, domestic abuse. All of those could have some physical signs there. Okay. Possibly some neglect could come in there as well. Okay. Not wanting to be left by themselves or alone with particular people. Yeah, so they might seem more nervous. Their behaviours might change around a certain person. Yeah. Again, they might be unusually light-hearted and trying to insist there's nothing wrong. So they might be trying to hide what's going on. And we've talked about some of the reasons why people could be embarrassed by what's going on to them. Yeah, they could feel ashamed. that it's happening to them. Yeah. So for a lot of people, they don't identify as a vulnerable adult, yeah, until they're actually, they won't necessarily feel vulnerable, and all of a sudden they're caught up in this situation where they are being abused and they don't know how to stop it. Okay, so that's some of the general signs that might make us concerned that something was going on. Okay, so we need to know how to report it. So if we've seen some of those things, who do we report it to? So obviously at work, you need to make sure you're familiar with your company or organisation's policies and procedures around safeguarding adults. So you should know who you can or can't talk to within your organisation. Yeah, so you might have a designated safeguarding lead. Yep, someone's just said that. It's literally going to be my next slide. So that should be identified in your policy. And again, yeah, it might be more than one person, because obviously that person might have a holiday at some point. Okay, so it'd be good to have more than one person, or to know who else you can talk to. Yeah. When needed, there's also forms to report safeguarding adults concerns. So there's one for North Northamptonshire and one for West Northamptonshire. Okay. It's also quite good to be able to have talked to the person before as well, so the person knows what you're thinking. Okay. So generally you talk it through with a safeguarding lead or your manager or supervisor. Yeah, if you okay. Sometimes if it's a serious or an immediate concern, you might immediately be contacting the police. So if there's been a crime committed, etc. But generally things tend to be a bit more subtle, and they tend to be concerns that have built up over time, or little things you've seen, okay, or a couple of people have seen and are concerned about. Okay, but if we see something, we should always share it and report it. Okay, so within your own policies and procedures, you might have some internal reporting where you can share what you've seen, what your concerns are. Yeah, talk to other people who are working in that situation. If they've seen anything similar, do they have any of the same concerns? So we need to make sure that we record everything we need to know. So if we're going to kind of take it any further, we need to record what our concerns are, or even if we're not, even if we just want to record it for now, so that, you know, if anyone sees anything in the future, they know this isn't the first time we've had concerns. Okay, so if the person said or made a disclosure to you, try and use their words, write down what it was they said. Yeah, don't change it, use their words as much as possible. Okay, if you've asked any questions, put those down. Yeah, and you can use exact words and phrases. You know, you can use quotation marks for them. Yeah, and sort of make it clear who said what. And you can also add in what you observed. So what was it you saw? Yeah, what made you concerned? Were there any non-verbal cues or body language that made you concerned? What were the behaviour changes you saw? Yeah. Were there any physical marks that you observed? Yeah. What was it you saw? Have you got a body chart where you can put them on? Yeah. You know, how big were they? What sort of size? Those sort of things. Where were they exactly? Yeah. And yeah, anyone else that was present. So who else was around at the time? Have you got the names of everyone that was there? Okay. So hopefully that's given you an idea on how to report and what to record. So then we've also got to think about consent. So I mentioned that it's best practice to talk to the person if we've got any concerns about them. Yeah. Again, might not be 100% possible, as some people have identified. They quite often they might have someone else with them at all times. Can you find a way to get them on their own so you can have a conversation with them? Yeah. So consent is really important. So it's mentioned 72 times in the Care and Support Statutory Guidance. So it's something we've got to be aware of. And the basic rule is simple: no one has the right to force something to do something without a lawful excuse. Okay. So again, if we can talk to the person about taking it further, we need to. Okay. So we must make sure the person has the right information to make a choice, and the person must be able to give their consent freely. Yeah, so we need to know that they're not being coerced by someone else. Someone else isn't putting pressure on them to make a decision a certain way. We need their decision. And the person must be competent. So that's where your Mental Capacity Act comes in. is the person competent to make that decision? Do they have capacity? Okay. So there are a few occasions where we might carry on without consent. Okay, so if we've got enough concerns about the person and we're unable to talk to them on their own, okay, then we might well make a safeguard, report a safeguarding concern if we really don't think we can talk to them. Okay. There will be some occasional circumstances where you should not seek consent from the individual or their family, or inform them that the information will be shared. For example, if doing so would place the person, the individual family member, yourself, or a third party at increased risk of harm, or lead to an unjustified delay in safeguarding the person, the individual family member, yourself, or a third party. Yeah. So if you've not got any reason to see them again for another few weeks, actually, you know, do you need to put a concern in now? Yeah, rather than wait till you've seen them again. Have you got enough concern there? Okay. But generally, as a rule, we should try and talk to the person if we can. Okay. So when reporting a concern, you may need to gain the consent of the person involved, but this is not always possible. This is known as the person's capacity to understand what is happening. So hopefully you've all heard of the Mental Capacity Act. Okay, we've been using it now since 2007. So we've had it for quite a few years now. Okay, what's that, 16 years that we've been working with the Mental Capacity Act for? So we need to make sure the person's got capacity to understand the information that is relevant to the decision they want to make. So they need to understand the information, not all of it, but a good amount of it, enough to be able to make the decision. Yeah, they don't need to understand every single little bit. They need to retain the information long enough to make the decision. So it's not a memory test. We're not asking them to retain the information forever, but they need to be able to keep, you know, have that information in mind while they're making the decision. They need to weigh up the information we've given them to be able to make the decision. And we need to communicate the decision by any possible means. So this could be talking, using sign language, or through simple muscle movements such as blinking an eye or squeezing a hand. Okay, so the majority of people can communicate some way and have got some documented communication system. Yeah, there are a handful of people out there that can't communicate at all, but most people have got some system of communication. Okay, so as long as we're sure and we're clear about what they're communicating, it doesn't have to be a verbal communication. Okay, so I've mentioned the Mental Capacity Act. So the Mental Capacity Act, as I say, we've been working with it for 16 years, and it has 5 principles that we work with. Okay, so we've got a poll that hopefully Chloe's going to put up for us. Okay, and I want you to have a look and see if you can identify those 5 principles from the list that that's going to come up on your screen. Okay, Chloe?
I have launched it, so hopefully it has come up.
No, it's not up.
No. Okay. I tell you what, while we're waiting, does anyone want to have a go at putting, oh, there you go, it's up now. So I hope I've got it now, so hopefully the rest of you have got it. So can you identify the 5 principles from that list? Okay, there's quite a few on there. So which are the correct 5? The 5 principles of the Mental Capacity Act. Yeah, we've got our first guesses coming in. Okay, we've got a few incorrect ones being marked, but we'll go through those in a bit. Okay, it's still going up. So I'll leave it open a bit longer. Okay. So I've got 28 responses now, so that's probably most people done. Okay, so we've got the top one, assume capacity. So whenever we're working with someone, principle 1 says we must always assume capacity. Okay. And the second one down, right to restrain. There is no mental capacity. It's not one of the principles of the Mental Capacity Act, so that doesn't give us any right to restrain under the principles. Okay. There's no best guess within the Mental Capacity Act. Okay. But we do need to take all practical steps to make sure the person's got all the information they need to make the decision. Okay. And we've also got the fact principle 3 is the right to make unwise decisions. Okay. So that is one of the principles of the Mental Capacity Act. People have the right to make unwise decisions. Okay. It also should be done in the person's best interest. So that's principle 4. So if the person doesn't have capacity, we need to make sure we work within their best interests. Okay. And principle 5 is that it should always be the less restrictive option. Okay. So hopefully those are familiar to you. Okay. So I've got them on the next slide here. So a person must be assumed to have capacity unless it's established that he lacks capacity. So when you're working with someone, you should always assume that they have capacity unless there's anything that gives you reason to think that they don't have capacity. So anything that they're doing, saying, acting that makes you think actually maybe they don't. And mental capacity is always decision specific. So no one ever blanketly lacks capacity. So we look at it on a decision by decision basis. Okay. So whether someone's can decide what they want to eat for breakfast, whether someone can decide what they want to wear that day, where they want to go, to whether someone can decide where they want to live, who they want to live with. Okay. Okay, so a person is not to be treated as unable to make a decision unless all practicable steps to help him do so have been taken without success. Okay, so we need to make sure that we're giving people the information they need in a way that they understand it to be able to decide if they've got capacity or not. Okay. And principle 3, a person is not to be treated as unable to make a decision merely because they make an unwise decision. Okay. And an act done or a decision made under this act for or on behalf of a person who lacks capacity must be done or made in their best interests. So the act does contain what they call a best interest checklist, so things you should consider when you're looking at whether someone's in the best interest. So this is going to include things like what their previous wishes were, what the people that know them really well, what they think the person would have done or what they know they've said in the past about this situation. It will look at lots of things like that. And then the 5th one is before the act is done or the decision is made, regard must be had to whether the purpose for which it is needed can be effectively achieved in a way that is less restricted of the person's rights and freedoms. And this is very personal to a person's situation, because actually what's less restrictive to somebody might be more restricted to another person. So you need to apply it to that person's situation, which is the less restrictive option for them. Okay. So hopefully those are familiar. So that's what we're working with when we're looking at the Mental Capacity Act. We need to be working with those 5 principles at all times. And obviously there's a lot of Mental Capacity Act with safeguarding. So obviously quite a lot of people with care and support needs might not be able to make decisions which make them more likely as a target for types of abuse. Okay, if they think the person won't be able to talk about it, or they assume they haven't got capacity, or that they won't be believed about what's going on. Okay. So when do we need to assess capacity? Okay. So we need to make sure that actually the very act of deciding to carry out a capacity assessment is not in itself neutral, as the assessment process itself can often be seen as very intrusive. So you must always have grounds to consider that one is necessary. Okay, so the person needs to have done something to make you think that they might not have capacity. Yeah, it's not always because another professional thinks a capacity assessment should be done. Yeah, it should be the person's given you signs. Yeah, because otherwise, if they haven't given you any signs they lack capacity, then we need to assume that they do have capacity. We must always be prepared to justify a decision not to carry out an assessment where on its face there appeared to be a reason to consider that the person could not take the relevant decision. Yeah. So one of these that can be quite tricky is if the person's made an unwise decision. So if the person decides that they want to stay with a person that's abusing them, they want to still have contact with that person, well, actually, you know, do they have capacity to make that decision? Have they given us any reason to doubt that they've got capacity? Yeah, because actually, if they haven't, then it could be that they do have capacity, but we also need to consider in their coercion as well. So is the person coercing them to stay? Yeah. So are they making a true decision, or are they being pressurized by someone else? Okay. Whilst the presumption of capacity is a foundational principle, you should not hide behind it to avoid responsibility for a vulnerable adult or an adult with care and support needs. Okay. The more serious issue, the one should document the risks that have been discussed with the person and the reasons why it's considered that the person is able and willing to take those risks. Okay, so we need to make sure we understand and the person understands what they're doing. Okay, it doesn't always have to be a capacity assessment. It can just be a discussion with the person to make sure that they're understanding what they're doing, that you're documenting. Okay. We also need to make sure that we share some information. Okay, so we've got an information sharing protocol. Okay, that's currently on the Northampton Safeguarding Adults Board website, and this is due to be updated. Okay, so there will be a new version coming out soon. Okay, so it's worth keeping your eye on that. But this says that partners will share any information relevant about an individual where that information is necessary for the safeguarding of the individual or others, as detailed below. The principle of proportionality will be applied to all sharing of information, and the information will be shared will be considered on a case-by-case basis to ensure that only the minimum necessary information required is shared in each case. Okay, so proportionality is one of the principles under the Care Act. Okay, so we need to make sure that we don't blanketly hand over someone's entire medical history. We need to make sure that we only share the bits that are pertinent to that safeguarding inquiry. Okay, so anything that's linked to that. So does that make sense to everyone? Okay, so we do need to share information across agencies, but we only need to share information relating to the safeguarding concerns. Okay, we don't share absolutely everything. So we've got some golden rules. These come from the policy. So we need to make sure that we confirm the identity of the person we're sharing with. So we need to know it's going to the right person. Okay. We need to obtain consent to share if safe, appropriate and feasible to do so. So if the person can consent to sharing, it's best, it's good practice to let the person know that we are sharing their information for this reason, but only, the amount of information that needs to be shared. Okay, again, if it was going to seriously slow the safeguarding inquiry down, then that might be a reason not to share. We need to confirm the reason the information is required and that this is in line with the purpose the information is held for, or a legitimate legal purpose for sharing. Yeah, so we need to know why we're sharing that information. We need to be fully satisfied that it is necessary to share or use anonymised data if possible. Okay. We should check with manager or data protection officer or seek legal advice if you're unsure about sharing anything. We need to not share any more information than is necessary. We need to inform the recipient if any of the information is potentially inaccurate or unreliable once you become aware of any inaccuracies. We need to ensure the information is shared safely and securely. We need to be clear with the recipient how the information will be used. And we need to record what information is shared, when, with whom, and why. And if you decide not to share, record your reasons. Okay, so they're the rules we need to follow if we are sharing information between agencies. Okay, so we've also got a decision-making framework within there, okay, which reminds us that safeguarding duties apply to adults who have needs for care and support. So they don't have to be met by the local authority. So they could be someone who's unknown to the local authority, so they might not have a care package. They might not have been in contact with the local authority. But if they're showing, if we think that they've got needs for care and support, if they're experiencing or at risk of abuse or neglect, and as a result of those care and support needs, they're unable to protect themselves from either the risk of or the experience of an abuse or neglect. Okay, that's our threshold for adult safeguarding. Okay, so to go along with that, we've got the decision-making framework. Again, this is another document that they're currently revising. Okay, so it's worth keeping an eye on the Safeguarding Adults Board website for the new version coming along. Okay, but we need to make sure that there's consistent threshold decisions that play a crucial role in ensuring that safeguarding inquiries are undertaken for adults at risk who meet the safeguarding criteria defined in the Care Act. It's important to note that this guidance is not a substitute for professional judgment. Rather, the guidance should be used as a framework for decision making and to support professional judgment. Yeah, so it's worth familiarising yourself with this, and it will give you an idea of what sort of concerns we should be taking forward, we should be reporting on, which ones we should be dealing with internally in our organisations, and which ones need to come in for further safeguarding. And again, if you're not sure, they'll always want you to refer it in. Okay, but it's worth familiarising yourself with this decision-making framework, okay, which will help support you in those situations. We also need to make sure under the Care Act that we make safeguarding personal. So this is engaging the person in a conversation about how best to respond to their safeguarding situation. So again, we might know that something's going on, but actually some people might have the capacity to say, actually, you know, I know it's going on, but actually I don't want to change it at the moment. Okay, so how can we make sure, what could we do to make safeguarding personal? Well, think about what you do in your job. How could you make sure that you know how best to respond to that person's situation? Okay, so do you want to use the chat box and give some ideas about what you might ask or how you might do this? Yep, so Noel's put involve the person. Yeah. How might you involve them? What sort of things could you do? Ask them what outcome they would like. Ask them what they want to change. So what are their outcomes for feeling safer? We've got discuss your concerns with the person. We've got let them, tell them what you are doing every step of the way. We've got asking them their views. Yep. Yeah. So finding out from them what it is that they want to change. Yeah. So trying to have that conversation of it. Having a future care plan, checking their understanding. And they may not be aware that they are at risk of abuse or neglect. So some people don't know what to expect. So things like organisational abuse, for the majority of people, they might not ever have been in, lived in a care home, so they might not know what's right and wrong. Yeah. So if you've never been in that situation before, you won't know what to expect. So you might assume that this is normal. Yeah. Okay, so all of those things can help us make sure that we're including the person. Yeah. So they brought this in to make sure that people felt involved in safeguarding, because otherwise safeguarding can feel very much like the local authority are taking over and making you very safe, but it's not always in the way that you want to be kept safe. Yeah. So we've got an example here of a GP surgery. So in our surgery, we identify if they have a certain GP they'd like to talk to and let them have an appointment to discuss what's going on with someone they feel safe with. They will then approach what we can do. Yeah. So again, who is it they're best talking to? That's often a really good strategy, isn't it? Is there someone that the person feels able to talk to? Okay. So all of those things will really help to find out what the person wants, what's best for them. Okay. So hopefully that's helped you to think about what making safeguarding personal is. Okay, so I've got a picture here for you. So I want you to have a quick think. So we've got that situation. So you've just walked through the door and you've seen this situation between Mrs. Brown and her carer. So what are some of the first things that you would do? So if you want to use the chat box, if anyone wants to put their hand up and share some of the things that you might do. Yep, so someone's put, ask what's happening. Yep. But separate the two people. Yeah, it depends on, yeah, absolutely. It could be the right thing to do. Talk to both of them. Reassure Mrs. Brown. Talk to Mrs. Brown. Yeah, possibly get a manager if there's one around, or a supervisor. Get someone else to come in. Yeah, don't automatically jump to conclusions. Yeah, ask if everything is okay. Yeah, so we could have other explanations for what's going on in that picture, couldn't there? Yeah, but we need to find out if there's something innocent happening or if there's something more. So what sort of questions do you think we could ask? Yeah. Introduce yourself, ask if you can help. Yeah. What might you watch for? Say you're asking any help. Yeah. What happened leading up to this? Yep. Yeah, have a look round. Is there anyone else in the room? The cared for person seems okay and at ease with answering my questions, no frightened. Yeah, so I'd watch for whether the person is happy answering my questions or if they're uncomfortable with the other person around. Yeah, you could ask a direct person. Are you helping this lady get up? Is the lady confused? Yeah. Have they got dementia? We need to watch how they engage with each other and their body language. Yeah. So again, anyone who works sort of moving and handling, is that a correct moving and handling procedure that they're there? Yep. Observe the situation and ask if everything is okay. Yep. Again, there's no definite right answers for this because obviously we can only see one side, so it does depend on what else is going on. Yeah, so someone's put the hand should be behind the back. Yeah. Yeah. So obviously, we shouldn't be grabbing, if we are helping someone up, that doesn't look like a correct hold to me. That looks like something that could cause further harm. okay, and could leave bruising. So actually, you know, do we need to follow up whether that member of staff's got moving handling training? Yeah, and if they have, are they carrying it out properly? Yeah. What else might we need to consider in this situation? So we've talked about other people in the room. We've talked about talking to the people, but we do need to be quite careful with the questions that we ask. Yeah, so we need to try not to ask leading questions. So can anyone give me some good open questions that we might ask both Mrs. Brown and her carer? Yeah. What questions could we ask? Yeah, some nice open questions that aren't going to lead the conversation at all. How are you feeling, Mrs. Brown? Yeah. It might be a good question. Can I help at all? Is she okay? Who's that question to? Yeah. Is that a good opening question? To the carer, right? Are you both okay? Yep. So we might ask something like that, kind of, you know, are you both okay? The person, because obviously if we're asking if she's okay, we're assuming Mrs. Brown can't talk. So obviously, you know, we should be talking to both of them. Don't know anything about Mrs. Brown. Is any I've got someone saying they've lost sound. Is everyone, I'm assuming everyone else can hear me. Yeah. Okay. Chloe, are you able to pick that up with Louise on the chat and see if you can let her know?
Yeah,
okay.
we'll do.
Okay, so we thought about where are we going with Mrs. Brown? Yeah, so we're talking about making sure we're being person-centered. So yeah, we should definitely be talking to Mrs. Brown herself as well as the carer. Yeah. Okay. Yeah, so we wanted some good open questions to find out what had happened. So I hadn't seen any really good ones come through yet. So has anyone else got an example of a really good question that we could ask Mrs. Brown? To find out what's going on. Yeah, so we've got, would you like to talk to me privately? Yeah. Yeah. Are you trying to get up off your chair? So again, that's quite a direct question, so it's not a very open one. It's something we might want to rule out, but it is a fairly closed question. Is there anything I can do for you, Mrs. Brown? Yeah, please, can you tell me what the situation is? Can you tell me about your day and what's happening? So that's quite a good one there. So that tell me, yeah. So that's not adding anything in. That's not putting any connotations on what's gone on. Yeah. So that tell me about your day is a really good opener for a question. If you want to find out generally how Mrs. Brown is feeling, you know, what's going on for Mrs. Brown. Okay. Is there anything I can assist you with, Mrs. Brown? Yeah. Okay. So yeah, the really good open questions are things around sort of the tell me explain the day. So you might ask the carer to, explain what's happening. We might say, can you describe what went on this morning? Yeah. Okay, so they're the sort of really good open questions that we want to encourage. Yeah, when you are talking to someone, so they're called the TED questions. So tell, explain, and describe. Okay, so can you tell me what's happened? Can you explain? Can you describe? Yeah, because actually those open up the conversation. They don't push it down any particular route. So they allow Mrs. Brown to decide whether she wants to talk about what's going on or not. Okay. And again, it might be a good idea to talk to them both separately. Yeah. Might be a good idea. Again, if this isn't your place of work and you're just a visitor in there, it might be worth talking to the senior on shift or the manager about what you saw. Yeah, about what went on. Yeah. But yeah, you could also talk to Mrs. Brown and ask her about what's gone on this morning, get her to tell you or explain what's been happening. Okay. And as we said, it could be a perfectly innocent situation that we've walked into, but unless we're absolutely sure, it's the sort of thing that we should perhaps just ask some questions and see if we're satisfied with people's answers. Yeah. Okay, has anyone any questions on that and what we do? Okay, so we've talked about kind of some of the initial stuff. Yeah. What would we do if we did have concerns? Okay, so if this was your place of work, what are you going to do if you did have some concerns? What could you do? Yep, so we've got report it senior, speak to the line manager, discuss with management, speak to a manager. Yep. Yeah, it could be your safeguarding officer or your safeguarding lead. So if you do have one of those, they might be the person to talk to. Yeah, because again, if you haven't actually seen anything definite, you might just want to raise the concerns. Yeah. So record the concerns. Ensure it's factual. Absolutely, because in this situation, there's a lot of kind of don't knows there. So you can only record what you actually saw. Okay. You've got write everything down. Yeah. But again, make sure you're sticking to your facts. Okay. So what does their body language say? Okay. You might ask the member of staff to leave the room. And again, it depends on the situation. Okay. It might not be, there might still be other people in the room. So again, you still might not be able to talk to Mrs. Brown privately. Yeah, someone suggested checking the CCTV. So again, if there was CCTV, that might be something, or it might be something you might ask the manager to check. Okay. Yeah, so if the lady was distressed, you might, yeah, definitely. If the lady was being more distressed by the member of staff, yeah. Particularly if it's your place of work and you know the people involved, yeah, you might well suggest that they leave for now. Okay. Okay. So what about if you were a visitor? So you're a visitor who's just walked into this situation. What might you do in that situation? It might be slightly different to what you'd do if it was your workplace. So this time you've gone in as a visitor. So speak to your manager. You can raise your hands as well if you want to speak. Ask if everything is okay. Ask to speak to the senior member of staff. still highlight it with the manager. If not available, to get in touch afterwards. You also get advice from the adult safeguarding team. Yeah, someone's put NCC on there, but obviously we don't have Northamptonshire County Council. We've got North Northamptonshire or West Northamptonshire councils now. Okay. So again, it's knowing where to go. Yeah. So having that, knowing whether you're in North or West, although I'm sure they'll soon send you to the right one if you've gone to the wrong one. Yeah. Okay. Yeah, so start a general conversation with both the carer and Mrs. Brown as if nothing was happening, to try and get the feeling of the situation. So yeah, someone suggested, good morning, how is everyone today? Yeah. That's it. So if it doesn't, if it doesn't appear to be much, so again, that's going to start getting that general feel. So, like the tell, explain, describe sort of situation. Yeah, that's it. That's kind of that non-confrontational, trying to get a feel of what's going on. Yeah. And again, all that can feed into what you go on to report, can't it? Or what you go on to speak to the manager, the senior, or the council safeguarding team about. Yeah, if you've got those concerns. Yeah. Okay. So hopefully that's given you some ideas. So hopefully we've thought about identifying that actually there might be something going on. Yeah. We've thought about how we might ask some questions to find out what's going on. Yeah. If we are concerned that there's something going on, what do we need to make sure that we do? Anyone got any ideas? So if we are concerned that there's something going on, what are some of the things we've talked about? Okay, so have it recorded and make sure it's signed. Don't ignore it reported. So if you aren't sure what's happened, make sure you pass it on. That's really important, isn't it? If you're not happy with a situation, yeah, talk to other people, highlight it. Yeah, ensure immediate safeguarding is in place. Possibly, yeah, if you've got definite concerns that something went on, yeah, you can immediately make sure it's reported. Okay. Again, there's probably nothing in that picture at the just from there that would involve immediately getting the police involved, but we might make sure that we do report it straight away. We need to follow up after reporting to the relevant team member. Yeah, we've got to report it, be clear what the concerns are and document. Yeah, and raise a safeguarding concern. Yeah, so they're all the things we need to make sure we do. There's a few other things in there. So if we do think something's going on, we need to make sure we talk to Mrs. Brown and get her views, don't we? So we need to make sure that we're keeping it personal. Yeah, so if you do have concerns, you can speak, you can get advice from the local authority safeguarding team. So if you're still not happy or not satisfied with what's going on, you can ring up either West Northamptonshire or North Northamptonshire Council and talk your concerns through. Okay, and get some further advice on what you should do. Yeah, because again, you might, if you haven't seen or got anything that's really concrete there, but you're still not happy with what you saw, yeah, that's the times when we need to think about, making sure that other people are aware. Because if everyone saw a little snippet like that every time, it might build up a picture, mightn't it? Yeah. So that we know what's going on. Okay. So we've talked about making sure that we find out what's happened. So we're making it personal for Mrs. Brown. We need to know what Mrs. you know, what Mrs. Brown's opinion is, don't we? Okay. Okay. So we've got a few here. So yeah, so we've got watch the body language of both people. So note down what you saw, observed, and the facts, not what you think you saw. Ask Mrs. Brown what happened on her own and find out what she would like to do. You might write down Mrs. Brown's response. We've talked about some of those questions you'd ask, so those tell, exclaim, explain, describe type questions, those really open ones, yeah, that will help us to find out. We've talked about reporting it, or you know, if we're unsure, we can just ring up and get that advice from the two teams. Okay, whichever one you're in. Okay, so we've got any thoughts on what we can do if Mrs. Brown says, I don't want this to go any further? What do you think we should do then? Anyone got any thoughts? Out of all the things we've covered this morning. Yeah. So someone says we've got a duty of care to cover it. So what is, yeah, explain we have a duty of care with safeguarding to report it. Yeah, do we always, yeah, what's our duty of care in this situation? Yeah, so we do have a duty of care, you're right. Yeah, to report it, but actually if, which, given the situation, you know, if the carer is solely working with Mrs. Brown and Mrs. Brown says, you know, I don't want to report it, we might not have a reason to report it further, but actually the majority of carers are going to be working with more than one person. So we do have that public duty to report it, because actually we don't know if they're working that way with other people. Okay. Again, someone's put a capacity assessment. Again, we might not do a full assessment, but we need to be considering if what Mrs. Brown is saying shows that she has capacity. So we're going to assume that she has capacity, not necessarily do a capacity assessment unless she's given us reason to think. Okay. And it would depend on what she is referring to and what happened. And depending on the severity still, make sure it is reported to the management or senior. Unless she hasn't got capacity, we have to listen to her wishes. Yeah, absolutely. Unless we've got that further public duty. Okay, so if the carer is working with other people, then we do have a public duty to report what's going on. Okay, without disclosing why, ask another member of staff to occasionally check on her. Yeah, make sure she knows the options and that she can change her mind if she chooses to. Yeah, so making sure she understands that actually, you know, what safeguarding is, how she can make, how she can report it if she does. Yeah. So we've got the duty of care to others being supported by the provider. Could others be at risk? Yeah. So if those other people are at risk, we've definitely got a duty to report it further. So if that carer is working with people other than Mrs. Brown, we need to make sure it's reported so they can look at whether anyone else is at risk. Yeah. And it depends if the risks identified affect others. Absolutely. So yeah. So in most situations, the carer is going to be working with more than just Mrs. Brown. So we need to make sure that it's reported in that public duty. So we can make it, you know, more general than that. Okay. So hopefully that's thought about quite a lot of the issues there on what actually it can feel like, you know, some of the things we need to think about when we're actually in a safeguarding situation or a potential safeguarding situation. Okay, some of the things we need to think about. Okay, so has anyone got any questions from that or any comments you'd like to make? You can either type in the chat or you can raise your hand. Anything else they'd like to ask after everything we've covered? So we've covered quite a lot. We've looked at what safeguarding is. We've looked at the different types of safeguarding, some of the things we might look for in the different types of safeguarding. we've looked at consent, we've looked at the Mental Capacity Act, we've looked at making safeguarding personal, we've looked at how to report, we've looked at when to report. We've looked a little bit around the questions we might ask. Okay, so we've covered quite a lot in what's almost been 2 hours. So has anyone got anything else that they'd like to add? No. If no one's got any questions, anything they'd like to add, Chloe, did you want to put the evaluation links in? And we've also got a final link there to the Northampton Safeguarding Adults Board website. And again, you know, if you do have any safeguarding concerns, make sure that you talk to the local authority for advice. So if you have seen something, if you're not sure what to do, then definitely ring up or speak to the local authority.